Alright guys, welcome to Underground Science, and in this video we're going to be talking about the pulmonary circulation of the heart. Alright, so pulmonary circulation is pretty much going to be involved in taking deoxygenated blood that's coming into the heart and making that blood oxygenated by bringing it to the lungs. Alright, as you guys can see a picture of the lungs right here. So let's write down the structures involved in pulmonary circulation of the heart. First, we have the right side of the heart, right side of heart, right? So the right side of the heart is going to be involved in the pulmonary circulation, and we're also going to have the pulmonary arteries, all right, the pulmonary arteries, and in this video we'll also cover the veins. All right, so far we have the right side of the heart and the pulmonary arteries and veins of the heart. And the last structure that's going to be involved in the pulmonary circulation is going to be the lungs. All right, so before we dive into this and start talking about the pulmonary circulation of the heart, let's just write down the basic definition of pulmonary circulation. All right, so let's write it down here. So what's pulmonary circulation mean, right? What does it mean when someone says, oh, how does the pulmonary circulation of the heart work? Well, all pulmonary circulation is the right side of the heart will work together, together with the lungs to oxygenate blood, right? So remember, as we'll see in the next slide, deoxygenated blood is going to come into the heart. And remember, our body constantly needs oxygen, right? So the right side of the heart will take that deoxygenated blood, send it to the lungs, and the lungs are full of oxygen. So that deoxygenated blood will get oxygenated, and it can finally come to the left side of the heart, which will then involve systemic circulation, which will be the next video. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we have two heart pictures here because just in case we ran out of room on either one of them. All right, so let's start with this heart picture right here. Okay, so I'll be writing down a bunch of numbers as steps. All right, what's the steps of pulmonary circulation? And then I'll be writing it out word for word on another page. All right, so first, in pulmonary circulation, remember from the basic structures video that I made, these two are the vena cavas of the heart, right? This is the superior vena cava and this is the inferior vena cava. And those two big veins are going to bring in deoxygenated blood, so blood that doesn't have much oxygen in it, and it's going to bring that deoxygenated blood and dump it into the right atrium. All right, so this is the right atrium of the heart. So now the right atrium of the heart has a lot of deoxygenated blood, right, from the body that the vena cavas have now brought in. All right, so we're going to label that as step one. All right, so we're going to go write that down real quick. So step one, we just said, was that the two vena cavas of the heart, right, the superior and inferior vena cavas, will dump deoxygenated blood into what? Right, into the right atrium. All right, remember that's the first chamber of the heart. So now the right atrium is full of deoxygenated blood. That was step one. All right, sweet. So now let's look at step two. What's going to happen next? Well, we see that there's another chamber sitting down here. Let me do it in red. Oh no, that's not a good color. Let me do it in orange. Right, this is going to be our right ventricle. So the deoxygenated blood in our right atrium will get pumped by the right atrium, right, by the myocardium, which is the muscle tissue around the right atrium. The deoxygenated blood will get pumped from the right atrium and into the right ventricle, all right, via this tricuspid valve. All right, so that means that now the right ventricle is the chamber that's full of the deoxygenated blood, right? So now the right ventricle has all this deoxygenated blood, and we're going to label that as step 2. All right, so we're going to go here and we're going to write out step 2, which was the right atrium, right, RA for short, will contract and pump the deoxygenated blood into the right ventricle, RV for short, and via the tricuspid valve. All right. So now we have our deoxygenated blood in our right ventricle. Now from there, the right ventricle will actually pump that deoxygenated blood through this pulmonic valve and into these pulmonary arteries of the heart. All right, so it's going to pump that deoxygenated blood through the pulmonic valve, remember, which is this valve right here that I'm coloring in, and it'll pump that deoxygenated blood into the left pulmonary artery of the heart and into the right pulmonary artery of the heart. Okay, and these two pulmonary arteries will then take this deoxygenated blood while branching into smaller blood vessels and to the lungs to get oxygen. All right, so let's label that as step 3. Okay, so let's go write that down. So at this moment, the deoxygenated blood is in the right ventricle, right? So the right ventricle will pump, right, will contract, right, using its myocardium, its muscle tissue, will contract and pump the deoxygenated blood through the pulmonic valve, and into where, guys? Well, it's going to pump into the 2 pulmonary arteries of the heart. All right, and that's going to go to the lungs. 2 pulmonary arteries of the heart. All right, and a little extra, like you could say, side fun fact is that when the right ventricle pumps, it's going to pump at a pressure of about 20 to 25 millimeters of mercury. All right, just keep that in mind for now. So the right ventricle will contract and pump that deoxygenated blood through the pulmonic valve and into the 2 pulmonary arteries of the heart at about a pressure of 20 to about 25 millimeters of mercury. All right, so that's step 3 down, right? Now the blood is out of the pulmonary arteries, and now where does it go next? Well, we said that the pulmonary arteries will branch into smaller vessels and go to the lungs to get oxygen. So let's see a little drawing of that. All right, so this is my, I guess, representation of the heart and lungs. It's obviously not a good drawing, but it's good to get the concept down. So at this moment, remember step 3, our right ventricle contracted that deoxygenated blood at a pressure of about 20 to 25 millimeters of mercury and out of these pulmonary arteries. Okay, so now the blood just spurted out. All right, and now what we have to keep in mind is that these pulmonary arteries will branch in to smaller blood vessels near the lungs, and this will help with gas exchange and have better oxygen and carbon dioxide diffusion. All right, so let's see what I mean by that. Okay, so here's a picture of just the right lung. Let's just take the right lung, for example, for now. So what I meant by the pulmonary arteries branching into smaller blood vessels is this. Okay, so the pulmonary artery, right? In this case, we're talking about the right pulmonary artery, won't just stay a huge pulmonary artery all the way down to the lungs. All right, that's not efficient. We want small blood vessels that don't have a thick outer layer to it, so we can increase the rate of diffusion. All right, near the lungs. So what's going to happen is the pulmonary artery will actually start to branch into smaller blood vessels called arterioles. All right, it's going to start to branch into arterioles, and then once it gets to the lungs, right near the alveoli of the lungs, and remember the alveoli of the lungs, right? So these are the bronchioles of the lungs. So when you take a deep breath, it goes down your trachea and it goes down to your lungs through these bronchioles, right? These small branches, and the air, the oxygen that you just took a breath of, will finally end up in sac-like structures called alveoli. All right, so these are the alveoli that I'm talking about. This is where the oxygen will arrive after you take a breath. So these are called what? These are called the alveoli of the lungs. All right. So again, these alveoli are the sac-like structures deep in the lungs that are responsible for storing that oxygen that you breathe in, and it's responsible for gas diffusion right now. So right now when I show you what happens, that's the other job of the alveoli. So as these pulmonary arteries start to branch into smaller arterioles, these arterioles are going to branch into smaller structures, right? These are the smallest structures, and these are going to be called capillaries. All right, so these are now capillaries, and in the capillaries, remember, we have a lot of CO2, right? A lot of waste. And in the alveoli, we have a lot of oxygen, right? There's a bunch of oxygen in the alveoli. Oxygen, oxygen, and we have to have a mechanism in which we can diffuse the CO2 back into the alveoli so we can exhale it out. And also we have to diffuse the oxygen from the alveoli and into the capillaries, right? Because that's the job of the right side of the heart. What's the purpose of sending the blood through these pulmonary arteries, right? All we want to do is get that deoxygenated blood to be oxygenated. So we have to have these oxygen molecules in the alveoli of the lungs. We need those oxygen molecules to diffuse into the blood. And we need the CO2 molecules already inside the blood, right, to diffuse back from the blood and into the alveoli, right? So we need this to diffuse back into the alveoli so you can exhale it out. All right, and that's exactly what happens. As these capillaries come near the alveoli of the lungs, what happens is this. Let me show it to you in a zoomed in version. All right, so this, remember we just talked about the alveoli, and this is a zoomed in, right, like a very zoomed in drawing of one singular alveolus, right, just one alveolus, and this is the single capillary that I was talking about. Remember, as the capillaries are coming down from the right pulmonary artery, in this case, we're just talking about the right pulmonary artery, the capillaries will have deoxygenated blood in it. Remember, because the right side of the heart is responsible for getting that deoxygenated blood oxygenated, and when the right ventricle pumps, it's pumping all the deoxygenated blood out of the pulmonary arteries. So that means if the pulmonary arteries are letting go of deoxygenated blood, and that deoxygenated blood are traveling in blood vessels, right, that are branching into smaller blood vessels like the capillaries, these capillaries are carrying that same deoxygenated blood coming from the right ventricle. All right, that's why I represented it as blue, because blue represents deoxygenated blood. All right, so this blue is a capillary that's deoxygenated blood, right? That's carrying deoxygenated blood, wanting it to be oxygenated. All right, and this is an alveolus, and remember what's inside this alveolus? A bunch of oxygen, right? We have a bunch of oxygen here, just floating around, ready to save the day. All right, so all this deoxygenated blood is coming through right? And as soon as it comes near this alveolus, the CO2 in the blood is going to diffuse from high to low concentration and go into the alveolus, and the O2 in the alveolus will diffuse from high to low concentration and diffuse back into the blood, right? So now what's happening? We can see now this blood, this deoxygenated blood that the right ventricle pumped, that's coming down the capillary, is now slowly getting oxygenated, right? We just saw that oxygen came in and CO2 left, right? And you exhale that CO2 out. So now what happens next? Well, we just said that the blood that was coming down the capillary, which was the deoxygenated blood, right, from the right ventricle, now has gotten oxygenated, right? Finally, thanks to the alveolus, right? That's full of oxygen molecules. And since now the blood is oxygenated, instead of being a capillary, now it's going to be called a venule, okay? Because now the capillary will come in, right, as a capillary because it's carrying deoxygenated blood away from the heart and to the lungs. But since the blood in the capillary has now got oxygenated and it's now going back to the heart, all right, so that's going to be called a venule now. Remember, veins are blood vessels that carry blood to the heart, okay? So in this case, we're talking about a venule, right? It's just smaller branches after the capillary, and soon this venule will dump all the oxygenated blood into the pulmonary veins of the heart. All right, so if we're talking about the right lung, if all of this activity, right, all of this gas diffusion and deoxygenated blood getting converted to oxygenated blood is happening in the right lung, then these venules will take that oxygenated blood now and will dump it into the two right pulmonary veins, right? If this is happening in the right lung, because the right pulmonary veins are there to receive oxygenated blood from the venule from the right lung, and the left pulmonary veins are there to receive oxygenated blood from the venules of the left lung, okay? And also, all the blood that's dumped in to these pulmonary veins of the heart, the right pulmonary veins and the left pulmonary veins, all the blood, no matter what, is going to come and dump right here into the left atrium. All right, so now the left atrium will have blood that's full of oxygen, and now systemic circulation will begin, and that's going to be our next video. All right, so let's do a quick review of what we just learned in this video. So first, we said what? First, actually, let me pull up a picture of the heart first so it's easier to understand. All right, there you go. So what was step one? Right, so this is now a review. So if you guys want, you guys can go ahead and pause the video and try to go through step by step what the pulmonary circulation of the heart is and how the right side of the heart, pumps blood to the lungs and gets oxygenated. So once you're done doing that, you can unpause the video and see if you're correct or not. So let's go ahead and get started. So step one was deoxygenated blood, right? So I'm just going to represent that with the O2 with the cross, will arrive at the right atrium via what? Via the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. All right, step two is that deoxygenated blood will get pumped, erase that, will get pumped, right, from the right atrium and into the right ventricle, right, via what? The tricuspid valve, which is right here. Next, that right ventricle that has the deoxygenated blood now will pump at about 20 to 25 millimeters of mercury of pressure, and it's going to pump that deoxygenated blood. So right ventricle will pump deoxygenated blood through the pulmonic valve, which is right here, and into the pulmonary arteries of the heart. So the right ventricle will pump deoxygenated blood into pulmonary arteries. All right, pulmonary arteries of the heart. And now that deoxygenated blood will leave the pulmonary arteries of the heart, and it's obviously traveling in blood vessels, right? The blood, but it's going to start branching into smaller blood vessels. So remember, it's going to start off as pulmonary arteries. So let's just take one artery, for example. So let's just say pulmonary artery, right? So it's going to start off as a pulmonary artery, okay? But it's not going to stay a pulmonary artery. It's going to start to branch into smaller arterioles, okay? And once it gets near the lungs and near the alveoli, it's going to branch into capillaries, all right, which are even smaller than arterioles. And this makes it easier, remember, to diffuse oxygen and CO2 into the alveoli and out of the alveoli. So after it branches into capillaries, remember, capillaries are carrying the deoxygenated blood that was just pumped from the right ventricle and into the pulmonary artery, right? So the alveoli will make the deoxygenated blood in the capillaries to be oxygenated again, right? Because remember, the alveoli contains all the oxygen molecules in it. So now the capillaries will turn into venules, all right? So they turn into venules, and these venules now will have not deoxygenated blood, that was the capillaries. These venules will now have oxygenated blood, right? Because the alveoli in the lungs provided that oxygen and caused the deoxygenated blood to now be oxygenated blood, okay? And the last step after the venules, right? So it's going to come in as capillaries near the alveoli, and once it becomes oxygenated, right? Once the blood inside the capillaries becomes oxygenated, the blood vessel is going to turn into a venule, right? And now this venule, right, or many venules will take that oxygenated blood and dump that oxygenated blood into the pulmonary veins of the heart, right? And all that blood is going to come in to the left atrium, where systemic circulation will begin. Okay, and we'll discuss that in the next video. All right, so we just saw that the right side of the heart worked very intelligently with the lungs, right, of the body to take that deoxygenated blood that the right side of the heart received and turn it into oxygenated blood with the help of the lungs, right, with the oxygen diffusion into the capillaries. So the oxygen diffused into the capillaries, and we saw that the CO2 diffused back from the capillaries and into the alveoli to be exhaled out, right? And this caused the deoxygenated blood in the capillaries to become oxygenated and to transport that oxygenated blood through venules and to the left side of the heart, where now the left side of the heart will take that fresh oxygenated blood, right? Remember, in the left atrium, and it's going to pump that to the rest of the body, which is going to be systemic circulation. All right, so I really hope to see you guys there in my next video where I talk about the systemic circulation of the heart. All right, so see you guys there.